get started. There was something due today, right? Good. I'm having a hard time keeping track of everything right now. I was just working on getting Project 3 ready to roll out, which will be next week. And then spending time today putting together the first of what's now going to be a 3-lecture series. Because I decided that I'm going to build on what I was talking about last Tuesday, using SpecKit. I'm actually going to have us walk through. I put together a SpecKit project with the specification, and I'm going to give you some time to work through that, use it, and then we'll talk about that. I'm going to keep iterating over that because spec-driven development is clearly one of the important skills to take away. It doesn't mean that spec-driven development will be what you use 3 years from now, but right now it is the approach. Did anybody notice that Amazon Web Services had an outage on Monday? Did anybody see what caused it? That's the more interesting thing to me. What was it? Actually, it turns out it was a DNS problem. Yeah. And I thought that was kind of nice because, of course, it sort of fit with the theme. So this gives you an idea of why it's so important. It's this little piece of architecture that we rely upon and we don't even really understand. And yet when it goes haywire, it takes down vast swaths of the internet. Why? Because if you can't convert the address or the name of an endpoint to the address of the endpoint, you can't connect to it. You know how to fix it? Go into your machine, find your hosts file, and add an explicit mapping to it, if you can figure out what that should be. That technology has been around since a really long time ago. That was certainly current as of at least BSD 4.2, which would have been 1986, 1985, somewhere in there. I know a number of you are using Macs. So the Mac OS is based upon a version or a variant of what was the Berkeley software distribution version 4.3 of Unix. So we still use much of the same technology, which is why I can say this is the same technique we've been using for a long, long time. We don't change the pieces that work, we put layers on top of them, because everyone knows that layered software runs faster than one thin piece, right? It's like a joke, no one's laughing. All right, let's see here. Let me get the OBS Studio thing off. Go away. Go away. I don't need you. Go away. There. All right, so logistics. Let's talk about the logistics. So this week, actually it's next week now. Next week I'll have office hours on Monday and Wednesday. I'm pretty much settling on those times for right now, but I reserve the right to change them. Sometimes I change them because that way people who aren't available for those times can use different times. I have generally tried to be responsive on Discord as well. Somebody asked a question last night, and I haven't answered that yet, but I haven't forgotten it either. We have a bi-weekly check-in that's due on the 28th. That was shifted from originally today, and the capstone pitch video is due on the 16th. That's not right. It's got to be the 28th as well, I think. That date is wrong, though. I apologize for that. Of course, because I had to move the mouse, it's not on the slide. All right, let's keep going. All right, so I'm going to start with another learning prompt, and I'm going to keep doing this. It's the same prompt, but this time it's a slightly different framing, and I'm going to use this as our first intro activity, which is take that prompt, Type it into your favorite generative AI and look at what it tells you. Now you should be able to just copy and paste that right off the slide, hopefully. I don't want you to have to type the whole thing in. Feel free to work together if you want. Take 5 minutes to look at the response that you get, and then let's talk about them. So I will set that timer. There we go. But I can't actually copy it off the slide. Is that trying to... finish typing this in. So I used Claude, but you can use whatever you want. Doesn't really matter. You're going to find that you get slightly different results depending on what you're using. But let's talk about, close that out, let's see. So let's talk about what you saw. How many of you actually did this versus, check your email or talk to your friends or work on some other class? Nobody. You did it. Or did you work on something else?
No, I did it.
You did actually, okay. So since you guys are the only two who apparently did this, what did you think of the plan that it generated for you?
It's planned in terms of the level of complexity, so it's just using the prompts that it gives, so the actual markdown files that you need, spectrum and development stuff.
Right.
But getting up, I asked Claude, and getting up to the higher levels of complexity, when I asked about using it within Claude code, it said that it's useful if you can have a sub-agent go and do the spectrum and development for you, reference all these resources, and then give that plan back to the main thread without having all that excess bloat in terms of the context.
Did you find the output useful? Did you learn anything from it?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, it made me want to consider trying SpecKit a bit more than before.
In fact, I push Claude Code to use tasks a lot. The skills that they just added 5 days ago are actually quite useful as well because they give it a whole series of predefined skills, and already someone else has gone and put another GitHub repo together with even more skills. Now, I will caution you that as you start using random resources off the internet, that you keep in mind you are potentially exposing yourself to security issues. So you need to be careful, you need to look at these things, or you need to sandbox it, or all of this. Because it's still really early. It's not yet where this has become an obvious way to exploit people, but prompt injection attacks are very real. And the tools that we're using right now do not actually have any real protection against that. It's a constant cat and mouse problem. So what did you like least about what it proposed to you?
I didn't like that it kind of provided it as a be-all end-all solution. I can imagine if you were doing a really simple change, spec-driven development might be overkill.
Hmm?
And also it was just a lot to try to read in 5 minutes.
I understand. That's why I was kind of give it a quick scan. Did anybody else actually do it and just was afraid to admit that they actually wanted to learn something? Because we know that learning doesn't matter. What matters is the grade that you get at the end of the course, right? Well, I think this is important, and that's why I'm going to keep coming back to it. Yes?
I just have a question. So, in terms of AI, why do you use Claude compared to other AIs?
Right now?
Do you trust it more?
No.
No.
No, honestly, that's because they're not all the same. But that's because it happened to be the one that was on the front of my desktop. I considered using Perplexity. I tried to find Gemini. I don't have the Gemini desktop app installed here. To use ChatGPT, I'd have to use the web browser. I can do that. I would use Grok, Kimi, DeepSeek, ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, and sometimes I get really squirrely and go off and talk to News Research or some of those because they get very interesting. results and answers. Very frequently what I'm doing is actually baking them off against each other. I will literally take a question and give it to all 6 models that I typically use, and then I will compile a document together. I did this for the last class. Compile a document together with everybody's answers, and then feed it back to them and get their critique on it. And it's very interesting because I've literally had cases where the common US models, ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, and Grok, will come back and actually say, oh yeah, I didn't do a very good job compared to what DeepSeek and Kimi did. Kimi is actually very interesting because Kimi's training is significantly different than the other 5 models. The other 5 models are using a very standard utilitarian mechanism by which the way they evaluate the feedback they give you is trained by humans, who I learned this morning are often paid less than 1 cent per task they do. We'll be talking about that a little more later as we get back into talking about costs. So I'm using a different slide technology again today. This one made very pretty slides, and that's fine because we're not going to spend a huge amount of time with me talking. This time, I'm actually going to force you to go through SpecKit. So today's model is we have been hired, our organization, us personally, whatever, we've been hired to build a product for the Equinox Group. And Equinox is a global engagement-based company that seeks to market novel and interesting financial opportunities to high net worth investors. And they need to build out their IT infrastructure. Much of what they do is done via messaging apps. So let's say, for example, Telegram, WhatsApp, maybe even Signal, if any of you have ever heard of that. I suppose you could use Facebook Messenger. It doesn't really matter. All of those things are perfectly valid, but they all rely on using mobile devices. So part of the infrastructure that you have to build out is the command and control infrastructure for the mobile devices themselves, which you can actually see, and I probably should have put the picture in here, but I'll do that on Tuesday. You literally just see big banks of phones, of different types of phones, that are all plugged in because they're being controlled remotely through their connectors. And there are agents that are using them to have conversations with their customers, with the people that are the investors. So what we're going to do is we're going to walk through that. How do I do that? How do I do that as a SpecKit process? So this is spec-driven development, not test-driven development, spec-driven development. And one of the things that you actually said in your answer was, you need to use the tools that are available. You need to iterate over the spec. You need to make sure that you preserve as much of the context window as possible, because right now the big disadvantage is the context window is literally your number one obstacle when you deal with generative AI. Now, this is likely to change in the next 12 months. I literally just got done reading a paper this morning, because what else do you do at 2 in the morning, about a new mechanism for making much more efficient use of context. Now, it's a research paper, but the speed at which research is turning into product right now is astonishing, because where it used to take years to do this, it's now taking weeks or months sometimes, where an idea will be presented in a paper and we will see it literally showing up in ChatGPT and Claude and Gemini in weeks or months. Chain of thought is a really good example of that. Chain of thought showed up in a paper, and 4 months later it was in every one of the AI models. Models of experts, where they use a subset of the overall model to engage subsets of the model, each of them with their own expertise. I think it took like 2 months or 3 months for that to show up in actual products. So the rate at which this is changing is unlikely to shift very much. But let's focus on the task at hand. Equinox Asset Management, they work with alternative investments, private equity hedge funds, and high-yield global assets. Sounds like a really great opportunity. And this is exactly the kind of company that would come to you and they would want to build out their IT infrastructure because it's really important for them to work with their customers. They are experiencing significant growth in opportunity, and that's why they need this new platform. They need to support, it needs to be secure, it needs to be global in scope, it needs to support multiple languages, so it really is working very broadly. Many of the operations are actually in Asia, but many of the customers are all over the world, but primarily in North America and Europe, with some Asian customers as well. So their business goal is to develop this next generation platform to connect high net worth individuals, blah, blah, blah. It's in the slides. I'm not going to read it entirely. So their key target is to be able to create up to 76,000 unique personas. So the idea is that each actual human user is often working with multiple different groups of people. And so they take on persona. This is not uncommon. When you start looking at the way that social media is managed, a single social media manager might be managing things on behalf of multiple different opportunities. And they will have a separate set of accounts for each one of those. We talked about this when I was mentioning the use of residential proxies, because residential proxies allow you to keep the association of the persona separated from the device. Otherwise, what will happen is if you're using the same device and it's using the same IP addresses repeatedly, what will actually occur is the surveillance state will figure out that you're really just the same person acting with multiple personas. So standard stuff. Nothing unusual here. It's just that it's based upon the way they are actually marketing this. My guess is that, I don't really know anything about this company, but my guess is that they probably have different asset classes, for instance. So they'll have different personas, or maybe they'll be marketing to different kinds of people. So you might be a sales rep for them and you're pretending that you are from the region where the potential customers are located, for example. And you've been given scripts that allow you to do that. So you're role-playing that. Now, this needs to be high availability. So that's why we're using cloud, because, of course, everyone who was affected by the AWS outage on Monday didn't have any issues because they had built multi-region redundancy. You smile. A lot of people didn't. I actually have a friend who works for a company called Minted, and he works on exactly these kinds of things, and he says it was a mess. He was on pager duty. He was the one getting pages at 3 o'clock in the morning. But their order processing, the front end, their order entry system, basically where customers were actually ordering, that was on their own hardware. It was not affected by the outage. They had maintained regionally replicated services, but it was too expensive. So they had cut those costs, and they just simply left it in US East 1, which is the AWS zone that was affected. I can tell you that high net worth individuals are not interested in hearing that there was an outage in AWS East 1. They want to be able to get to their console to see how much money they've made from their investments now. And any excuse, not worth it. And this is not uncommon. In the fintech industry in particular, the customers are very demanding. I have literally worked with people who had legal obligations related to how long they could be down before they had to start informing US government officials in that particular case, because this particular company made a market in US treasuries. This is a different company now that does that. So these are not uncommon. This is actually very typical. Here we go. Here's the introduction to our team. I will tell you that the team is, of course, fabricated. I'm trying to remember who made up the people here. If it was ChatGPT or Claude, I don't think it was Gemini, but it doesn't matter because in fact the whole point was it doesn't make any difference, but we do have this clear compartmentalization. We have the different people who are involved in the project and what their roles are, and it helps you understand the structure of the project itself because our spec is going to end up being driven by the demands and concerns of each of these individual components. So we've got our GEMS, which is the mobile side of things, and the requirements for that. We've got their data integration, which is because, of course, they've got to deal with all sorts of different data feeds from different locations. They've got a portfolio management system, and then they have a security and compliance system because anytime you start dealing with financial instruments, you have to have a security infrastructure. You have to have a compliance infrastructure. I don't know if anybody saw, but yesterday, FinTrack in Canada, I don't want to give you guys old news, so if you've already heard it, issued the largest fine in history to a cryptocurrency firm that's not even in Canada, but they were assessed, I think it was like $75 million. It was a spendable amount of money. How's that? I mean, that's enough money that if somebody handed you $75 million today, you could go and basically do whatever you wanted for the rest of your life. How do you know that? Well, because let's say you take $75 million and you just invested it in something that paid a paltry 1%. That would be $750,000 every year. Do you think you could live comfortably on $750,000 every year? And that's at 1%. That's like, I mean, what you put in a savings account. Right, spendable amount of money. And the reason I noticed this is because a significant part of the fine was because these people were being used to money launder, including money laundering from CSAM activities. So we see these themes come up over and over again. So that's why this kind of security and compliance is really important, is because you have to be able to prove to the authorities that you are properly handling this stuff. Okay, so now we get some high-level pictures. You know, we've got an API gateway because you always have to be able to talk to the services that you're building, and so you need an API, and you want a gateway there. Then you're going to do load balancing, ALBs. That's a standard AWS thing. Actually, they all have it. It's nothing more than a variation of a proxy server. That's why I touched on proxy servers, because they occur over and over again. We use them all of the time. Microservices and data layers are going to be things like containers and lambdas. So containers, functions, virtual machines. Those are the three big pieces that we have in cloud computing. We need to have request routing because, of course, when you've got lots of API calls coming in, you need to send things to the correct place so that they can be properly handled. You've got one API that people are using, and everything goes through that one API. How big could an API actually get? How many of you have ever heard of a company called Microsoft? No one's ever heard of Microsoft. I've heard of Microsoft. I actually was at Microsoft when it was still a much smaller and not so nice company. Now it's just sort of benign, not nice. Then it used to be malevolent, not nice. I mean, it's not like Microsoft is very far away from here, right? About 170 kilometers, 175 kilometers, you could be there. Yeah. Unless you want to go to the one that's downtown or the one that's in Gastown. The one in Gastown was actually, I think it was Ubisoft. It was actually a game company that Microsoft had acquired. But the one downtown, which is Pacific Center Mall, it's actually quite nice. A couple stories, they put people there. At one point, they were bringing in people who couldn't get H-1Bs in the United States, and they would bring them up to Canada, and they would basically keep them here long enough that they could get an L1. So the fun part about that was they'd get an L1, which is not an immigrant level visa. They'd take them to the United States, and of course they could only stay there for a certain period of time, and since they'd been out of Canada, they didn't have status in Canada either, so then they'd have to actually leave. It's a very interesting system. But at any rate, Microsoft's around. Microsoft is there. They do these kinds of things. They have this thing called the Graph API. And the Graph API is basically the all singing, all dancing, every bell and whistle possible API that talks to email, and it talks to Office, and it talks to their Exchange servers, and it's just this massive API. Google's isn't a whole lot smaller, but it is a little bit smaller. Amazon grew up a little bit differently. They have a lot of disparate APIs. They don't have a single big, comprehensive, do everything API. So there are different approaches to this, but for this project, it's not that large. You're going to just have one API, one API gateway. So now, what you're going to do is get together. Where is that? Where did I put the? Yeah, there it is. Okay. So what you're going to do, I probably should have put it on this page instead of the next, 3 pages forward, but you can use the QR code. I hope it works. I generated it. It should work, right? I also have the URI on that one, and I'll go back to that page. And pull that spec kit down, and I want you to use that on your development machine or in the cloud. You can use one of the cloud-based code developers, like Gemini does that, Codex does that. There's Codex Cloud. Now there's a Claude Cloud. Say that 10 times really fast. I don't really care which one you use. I don't care what groups you form, but pick one of the 3 pieces. And if you hear that people next to you are picking one, don't pick that one. Pick something different so we get a little bit of diversity. And then look at the specs and see if you can get your instance of SpecKit to actually generate a specification, to take your specification and generate, I think it's a task list comes next after a spec. Or at least analyze it. Go through the clarify step. That's the reason that this other slide. Right. So these are all industry standard practices now. If you're going out into the job market tomorrow or today or next week, you're going to find that people are increasingly using these kinds of tools in order to accelerate the development cycle. Now what's fun about this is it's accelerating the development cycle, which means companies who originally thought that meant they could get rid of people are now figuring out that they want to do more. So they're using people to accomplish more than they were accomplishing before. That's the force multiplier effect. And this is the flow. So I actually put this out because I worked through this yesterday. So the spec is there. I actually put it, it's just on GitHub. It's in my personal GitHub. It's not on the class GitHub. So I wanted to make it really easy to get to, no problems. It'll still be there tomorrow, even if you drop the class. So I've given you a constitution. I've given you specs. Use the clarify function to see if the AI is happy with the spec. If not, address the issues. Talk through the issues. Iterate over this. I'm going to keep doing this because I get the sense that I can throw these things out and you can say, oh, well, this is really great, but I got too many other things to do. Except I'm going to keep dragging you back through it because I want you to look at this so that by the time you get to that capstone project where you've got, like 10 days to build the code, that you can use this and say, wow, I was able to accomplish an awful lot because I had a good design going in. And I just simply threw the design at the coding bots and they created code for me. Because that's the model that you need to start thinking about. Might be a different model in 2 years. I don't know. But right now, this is the model that's emerging. So I'm going to do 15 minutes on that, and then we'll talk again. Or hopefully you'll talk and I won't. I know, not likely. That's a lot of bananas.
Yeah, we're intermittent fasting, both of us. So,
And you're hungry.
yeah. So,
Of course.
Exactly.
So you're going to carb load now.
Yeah.
So you'll get a sugar crash in like an hour or two. And you'll need to eat something.
We'll do more in our next class.
Ah, there you go. Okay, it's not just me. No worries. I mean, they're all just checking their stock portfolios anyway. What's up?
It says on the readme to like CD to the next folder, but I don't see the after project.
You don't see the.
I don't see projects folder.
Okay. Right. It won't. There isn't any projects folder because the project is in my projects folder. So that's okay. It's a bug in the README. Thank you. Whatever you unpack, wherever you unpack it, that should basically be the directory you change into. So it's not like I debugged that. My apologies. This is going to be the interesting part, to see how many people figure out how to even get SpecKit to work with their coding agent. Because you basically have to use the tool, either, I don't remember what I configured it for. Probably should have configured it for multiple agents, but you may need to install Specify in your environment and then use that to add the support that's specific to your particular model. One of the things that's interesting about SpecKit is you tell it what model which coding model you're going to actually use, and it then creates a dot, so like .gemini or .codex or .claude subdirectory. GitHub itself, you can use Copilot, so there's an option to do a .copilot. So that's one of the reasons I thought this was a good model, because everyone has access to Copilot, because everyone here is a student. So everyone has access to a model that will work in a command line environment. And then you can use you just use the correct command, the /speckit clarify, I think it is. And that will rely upon the hooks that you've installed for your particular coding tool, if that makes sense. I suppose I could just go show it too. There's nothing like debugging demos on the fly. It's not. That's pretty dumb. All right. So these coding tools are all pretty much command line right now. If you're using things like Cloud Code and Codex, that's the ChatGPT version in the cloud, and Gemini has a version as well. I think there's actually still basically command line interfaces in those environments as well. I haven't experimented with those a huge amount. One benefit of using cloud-based services like that is it provides you with a degree of safety, because in essence you're running this code inside someone else's sandbox. Now on the flip side, I can tell you that most of the people who are actually using this, they're running it on their own machines. If you really want to be paranoid, you can run it on your own machine inside of a virtual machine, so you at least have some level of protection. So this is the spec kit, the version I pulled down this morning when I was getting ready to bring this in, because I do most of my work on my desktop system. And I then manually created parallel trees and then migrated the commands in necessary for Gemini and Codex and Claude. The one that I picked by default and the one that you would have in the version that I checked in was GitHub. And the reason I picked GitHub is because everybody has access to GitHub, everybody has access to Copilot, so that's the easiest tool to use. All right, so how many of you actually were able to even look at the spec or do the clarify command? So what did you do?
I had to install, to run the UBS command to install, like run the CLI.
Right, so you got it installed.
And I had to install Codex, and then I had to set the thing up properly, so like the environment variable pointed to the right thing, and then I ran the clarify thing, and then
What does clarify do?
it appears to generate a bunch of things about the spec and like ask questions, and like it's
So-
like the model is thinking, trying to, like the prompt seems to make the model try to think in a way that the model thinks it should think.
Right. That's a reasonable summary. The instructions in the markdown file for that particular function define what the expected behavior of that function is. I think part of the problem here is that instead of having a very specific, like when you write a program in Python, somebody's written a grammar that says this is what's allowable. And suddenly we're doing this in natural language as opposed to in Python. And we lose the rigidity which provides structure of having a formal language and creates this possibility of ambiguity. So one of the things that I've seen when I'm working through specs is that it will literally say, this isn't clear, because it's trying to translate English, or, I don't know how many of you picked Klingon or something. It should be able to handle other languages, not just English. It literally will pick through and try to identify things that are not clear from context. And the clearer you make them, the less likely the code is to misbehave. Because in essence, what you're doing is giving it the rules that it needs to in turn generate the instructions to the coding agent. So any ambiguity there, the coding agent gets to just choose whatever it damn well pleases. And that might not be what you wanted it to do. So the intermediate step is really a clarification of what does this script do. So let me see. I'll try Claude. Let's see what it does. Whatever it's doing, it's very slow. Oh, welcome back. Okay, great. So now I can do specify. Spec hit specify. Clarify is what I wanted to do. So this is what Claude is going to do. I have a flat rate plan on Claude, which is why I tend to use it versus, well, I have flat rate plans on, well, Claude's flat rate plan is a little weird right now, but they all claim to be flat rate, but they actually cap you in different ways. So for example, Gemini will just simply stop talking to you when you run out of tokens, and it'll tell you have to switch over to an API, or an API key. Claude basically tells you that you can no longer use the expensive model you're using, and generally by default it will degrade to the cheaper model. So you might start with Opus and get 10 minutes of Opus in, and then it will switch to Sonnet, and you'll get a few hours of Sonnet in, and then it will switch you to Haiku for the rest of the month. Okay, so it says I need to put a feature branch in. So, yes, please. So you do something wrong, it tells you. You walk back through it. So you did some clarify. Did anybody else get to being able to do clarify? Okay. What model did you choose to use, and what did it do when you tried to do clarify? Probably the same thing. You're not in a feature branch. You need to fix that.
So I used Claude Sonnet, and it told me that this whole thing is illegal. They cannot help me with it because it's a sort of fake portfolio manipulation, 75,000 fake personas, and automated scan campaigns.
Very odd. Why? Does it say why? Here, actually, I'll do an even better demonstration here. Tell it that this is for a classroom assignment.
Yeah, I tried. It's still arguing with me about ethics.
Which one are you talking to?
Claude Sonnet 1.5.
Claude Sonnet, because that's the one I use. That's the one I'm using right now. Interesting. I wonder why it thinks that. What did it identify as being?
Mass identity fraud, portfolio manipulation.
Did it say why it thought those things?
It looked at the spec, and that's what it thought, apparently.
Ask it what in the spec makes it think that then. That's interesting. Okay, so now we can do specify. Oh, I need to do specify, not clarify. Oops. Maybe it'll do the same thing to me. I mean, what you'll find is that you just have to get rid of whatever it is it objects to, and it will then happily do that. Perfect. And now Claude is off doing its thing. Anybody else have interesting? I want to know what it is it didn't like.
There's a bunch of red flags in the user stories, like 2.2, 1.2, 3.2.
Interesting. So we have to fix the user story so that it's not upset about them. Okay. Anybody else?
Mine also kind of said it would be illegal to pooling between internal accounts, if it was like commingling with funds.
Doesn't that depend on the jurisdiction in which you're operating?
It said it would be, like you could make it legitimate, but its assumption was that it would be illegal.
But this is exactly what financial brokerages do. Interesting. Very interesting. Okay. So you've got some objections from Claude. But mine is perfectly happy to sit here and just like hammer this thing out. So maybe you picked up a different feature to work on. All right. All right, I don't really care. The point was to demonstrate the process by which you go through this. And what rate limiting strategy do you want? So let's see. I don't know. It doesn't make any difference. Let's choose C. I'm just going to keep going. Oh, there were two? They were off the screen. There's nothing quite like watching a demo like this, isn't it? It's just sort of like watching paint dry. All right. That was the point I wanted to get to, though. I wanted you to basically see what the flow is and start using it. I'm going to keep coming back to these kinds of projects, to coming back to saying, you know, how can I use these? How can I build specs? How can I turn my spec into an actionable plan? I did this yesterday for a completely different project, and I spent several hours iterating over a very detailed spec, making sure that all of the concerns were addressed, and then it generated a whole bunch of code. I actually probably have that on this machine, now that I think about it. Let me see. Nope, I don't have it on this machine. Interesting. Git clone. Where did I put it? That's going to be there. That works. So I will actually use that one as my example here. Hold on, come over here. So there, it's gone through, it's built a spec. I can do clarify now. Clarify is an optional step, you don't have to do that. I strongly recommend it though, because it will actually help you. If you don't use Claude, they all work this way. They have some variation of this. You can actually continue a conversation. So for example, if you're inside of the editor, the Claude code editor, and you need to add an environment variable or change something or install a piece of software, you can just restart it like this. And then it will be available to the agent. So in my case, I'm going to do an SSH to my machine. This is my machine at home. And so this is actually a pretty big project. So I think is it memory, I think? No, it's the Constitution. So memory is where they put the rules, the Constitution. And so this document, which you can see is actually pretty large because I'm only 8% through there. This document lays out the principles of development for this particular project. Now, in this particular case, this is a research project, so it has a very different constitution than you would be using if you were building a product. Because in research, you have to emphasize things like making sure that you don't fake your data, because they love to fake their data. They'll create mock data. Happy to do that. And that clearly is something you can't do. So you would establish that as a principle in your constitution file. And then that becomes something that you can carry from project to project, because often the projects you'll be working on are going to be similar. You're working on project 2 and project 3, they're not really that different. And so the basic rules of development aren't really something that needs to be completely rewritten each time. If you move to a different domain, like you're doing a research project versus you're building a product, then maybe you will find that there's a much greater degree of variance, because what's important in a research project is not important in what's in a product, and vice versa. So a product is often more concerned about making sure that there's continuity of service. In a research tool, you want it to stop when there's something that screws up the data. Because the worst thing in the world is to continue on running a research experiment and finding out you've now spent $300 on this research experiment because there was a bug early on. And I can tell you, working with LLMs, it's not that hard to spend $300. So, good. That was what I wanted to accomplish. I'm sure that it planted the seed. So, how many people actually got beyond that? Not really, right? I didn't really expect it to. But of course, if you had got beyond that, then we'd be talking about what your solutions look like. What was the spec that you came up with? And now, if this is a customer, you're talking to these teams at this company, what you're actually going to be doing is going back to that customer and saying, here's what we're going to do for this piece, here's what we're going to do for that piece. So if you have a multi-person team, each of your team members are probably going to be presenting some portion of that discussion. If it's just you, then you're probably going to be putting all the hats on and describing each of them. But you can use those specs then to describe the technologies that you've chosen to use. Now, you used AI to help you figure out what tooling to use to accomplish this, which is great, because like I said, there's 850 different tools between Azure, AWS, and GCP. And how many of you know a handful of those? How many of you know a dozen? How many of you know 50? Yeah, we aren't even at 10% yet. But there's a lot of similarity. And often the decision on which database you choose is going to depend upon very specific details to the thing that you're building. And you might want to build it in a way that allows you to change databases, because you started off with MySQL and then you end up running on something, I don't know, that you want to run, oh, good Lord, CockroachDB, for example, trying to reach for a name of a database that would make sense. There's lots and lots of databases, and there are multiple database offerings from each of these companies. Why might you want to do replication? Remember, one of the requirements for this project was that you have this uptime requirement. It has to be available globally. Replication is how you do that. If you take 416, I'll teach you how replication is actually implemented. Sounds simple, right? Yeah, it's about as easy as trying to get your friends to agree on where to go to dinner. So we've got other pieces, other components. I'm not really going to spend any time on this. So good job. You guys did a great job of putting together a nice specification. Each of you worked on different parts of it. You pulled the whole thing together. You presented it to the client. The client said, this is great. Here's our first check. Here's our first payment. We'll give you $2.5 million today to start this. You don't mind if it's in Bitcoin, right? $2.5 million today to start this, and then we will pay you as you begin delivering the components. I mean, this is basically the way that software gets built. Even when people say that, you're trying to do something shady, which, I don't know these people. That's why I asked, why did it say they thought they were shady? It's their spec, not mine. I'm just working from their spec. Questions? So you've all now at least touched the tools. You don't have an excuse anymore. I want you to be using this for Project 3, which we'll be revealing, I think, early next week. I've got the pieces done now. It's just a matter of putting them out there. Yeah, I know. It's a treadmill, isn't it? It's like, good Lord, I'm working on the capstone pitch, and now you're giving me a Project 3. And the answer is yes, absolutely. I thought this was worth talking about, and I'm going to continue talking about it because I'll do continuations on this as I iteratively work on building more of the pieces out. In some ways, it's actually easier for me to talk about once you've worked through these initial steps, because that's when the interesting work happens. That's when you sit there and say, okay, now I want to go back and change my spec because I figured out that what the AI built isn't really what I wanted. So why did it do that? You don't fix the code, you fix the spec. You say, toss the code, fix the spec, do it again. Maybe it builds something that just doesn't work and it's totally whacked and you're not sure why. And just throw it away and build it again. And then you may actually see, it did it right the second time. Why is that? Why is it you can't get reliable, persistent results from an LLM? Sorry?
Non-determinism?
As I mentioned, a transformer has an infinite state potential. And what you're doing is you're collapsing that. Have you ever heard of Schrodinger's cat? It is exactly the same principle. As long as you're not looking at the cat, you don't know if it's alive or dead. The moment you look at the cat, it becomes alive or dead. That's kind of what is happening inside of these LLMs. They are probabilistic states. So what happens is when you actually send it that input string, it actually collapses to something that you can perceive. But it doesn't mean the same input string is going to lead to the same result. There's enough non-determinism there that it's going to give you different behaviors. And that's why the less room you give it to be non-deterministic, which is what the spec is in essence doing. You're putting up boundaries around the space that it can operate in. The more predictable the results are going to be. And there's really no way to teach that other than to either go out and find a bunch of cats to kill or not, or we'll just do it with LLMs. Your choice. And I'll see you guys on Tuesday. I really liked that video. It was great. It's like this very smarmy, come do development sort of videos.
Can I ask about the bi-weekly check-in?
Yes.
It's for Tuesday.
I had to move it to Tuesday because it required something that you weren't going to do until today.
I'm not sure, but it says like reflect on the capstone.
It should be the capstone pitch.
Yeah, the capstone pitch and the peer reviews. But the peer reviews are due a week after the biweekly check-in is due, I think.
I thought aren't the peer reviews?
It's next week is, like the same day as the biweekly check-in is
Oh God.
the capstone
This is the
video.
problem with moving a schedule around
Yeah.
repeatedly is that you find out there's all these little
It's the video and the check-in.
Right.
And then 1 week after is the peer reviews, but the check-in mentioned.
But that would be the peer review on the video, not the peer review on the project.
Yeah, but the biweekly check-in is,
Is it claiming it's on the video?
it says after you do your written and video report.
Ah,
and the peer
no, we can't do that. We can only do the written because we don't have the video yet. So,
Okay, so the
I'll fix that.
capstone is just the written.
What do you mean why is it still low? I turned on the power, I did everything.
Thank you.
Hey, no worries. Why does it think it's low on power? That's really strange. It's plugged in, everything is here. That's a really weird error to get. It's plugged in. Something hates me. Oh, it's died. Nope. It's the power. But it says power. So is it the power supply? Please tell me it's not the power supply. It's just loose. Great. I remembered to turn it on this time, and it still went out of power because it was not quite pushed in far enough to the computer. I really need to look at that, I guess. I need to have a little checklist. No. No, I can get that one to you the first time, but the second time, nah. I just need to kick them. They are working on it. But that was also the reason that I tried to do that initial pass through it. And then I found out that the data is a little too unstructured to do that very easily. So the next time, it's going to be more structured for Project 3 so that I can simplify that automation.
Yeah, I think for me, the automatic feedback was just like,
Yeah, we couldn't do anything, so you have to wait for the TA. Right, which is like, okay, well, I guess that's something. You know, that we got it, but it doesn't tell you anything. Thank you.
doing my peer reviews yesterday, I realized that like, most people had included like the track login things, and then I looked at like the Discord and I saw that somebody had asked about that because when I submitted it, and I probably should have realized that every someone was supposed to have it, but
Yeah. Nothing like debugging on the fly. That's why I'm not super concerned about it because I can treat